Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm your host, James Marcuzzo. This is the KSS. It is week 9, and I'm going to talk to you about the article Nationalism Gains Momentum, written back in, 2018. Point is, I think it's a little older than that. No, it is March of 2018. In a previous article, we discussed World Order 2.0, where we would re-envision the world, and instead of having all these individual autonomous nation states, we would look at things more as from a global governance point of view, probably a reimagined or even completely recreated alternate version of the United Nations. Okay, that's very much a globalism governing concept. This article talks about the distinction between nationalism and globalism, and the distinction between globalism and globalization, different concepts. Talks about nationalist type populist leaders from the right wing across Europe, the United States, the fact that China and Russia are both basically doing that, Bolsonaro down in Brazil, though I don't think it's mentioned in this article, and then other left-leaning liberal, more globalist type individuals. George Soros is kind of a dirty word for most people on the right, but Hillary Clinton and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, while being left-leaning, are not certainly vilified by most reasonable people. So we have an understanding in this article of what is the desire of sort of a nationalistic focus, state sovereignty, versus more of a globalist approach. And it's not a perfect article, but it's a good article because I think it gives us a solid framework to understand those differences. And I think it's explained fairly well. And then it even gives us some predictions, some of which I think actually came through. I do like that it just gives us a distinction to work with, a difference in definitions. So I'll give you a quick one here. In World Order 2.0, we were talking about globalism, the idea that we ought to be more interconnected, that people should be world global citizens, that we should all be under one world government. Ought to. Globalism. But in the first article, Globalization is Good for You, we talked about globalization as the natural diffusion and spreading and sharing of culture and economic ideas and capabilities without any claims of whether or not we should integrate. Right? There's a difference between my country and your country sharing ideas, trading with one another, and being friends, as opposed to us having to give up our rights and autonomy to some larger collective. Right? So globalization is much more of just sort of an economic and a practical reality. Globalism is an idea, an ideology even, directing us towards a path. And I think it's appropriate that this article spells that out for us. I think that's appropriate to do. It has a brief discussion about nationalism versus patriotism and how nationalism can look very different depending on the country. In modern context, nationalism is seen to be negative. Patriotism previously was not seen to be a negative, but is now being sort of lumped into the same thing. But consider for a moment, if you're an American nationalist, then you're in favor of the nation and of the people of the nation, but you don't get to distinguish Black or Hispanic or Asian or Jewish, right, or indigenous Americans from any other American. They're just Americans. So practically speaking, nationalism in the United States would look different than French or Polish or German nationalism, where within those borders there is a history and a language and a religion and a shared set of values and experiences that go back a long ways. So nationalism will look different depending on the place where it's practiced, though most commonly here in the US, we have a very negative connotation. We probably think of something like white nationalism, and that's just a synonym or a euphemism for something like neo-Nazis or the KKK. So there's that. There's a brief discussion about the rise of Boris Johnson in the UK, of Orban in Hungary, of Marine Le Pen in France, and of course Donald Trump here in the United States. Make America Great Again. And one of the opening sort of concepts in the article, I won't go any further than this just to set the stage, one of the opening concepts is that, as our authors indicate, the idea of globalism, that we should become more connected and submit to the collective, right? That is being rejected or pushed back against by many nationalist movements, at the least in the West. But we know that nationalism is rampant, right, in places like China and Russia, for example. It's like the name of the game there. It's not even a question. So then the interesting thing that our article kind of guesses at is, what do we see coming down the pike in the next several years? And I think at least one of the things came true, where President Trump, in his tenure, attempted to either dissolve and or renegotiate NAFTA, a trade agreement, for example. And that's relevant because Zbigniew Brzezinski, an American politician and aide to several presidents, was attempting to sort of set the stage for a de facto world government. And it was these little incremental steps of the European Economic Union, and then eventually the European Union, and the NAFTA, and all of these different organizations of regionalization, countries coming together to act in unison. He said this was the idea that we would just eventually get to world government. And we'll see if that ever happens. I have my doubts. And I'm not even sure if it's a good or a bad thing. Enough said. We'll talk soon.